Hey, what's going on, everybody? Thank you for joining us here on our last edition of the split of the Rift Rewind. This is a special playoff edition. LEC Championships just concluded. LCS Championships ahead of us. Let's talk about both of them and so much more. We got Emily Rand, Jacob Wolf, I'm Arda Ocal. Lots to get into. First things first, want to mention that the LCS finals will be happening at 4 p.m. Eastern. We will be done before that. As soon as we're done, head on over to ESPN2 or the ESPN app. You'll watch the final between Flyquest and Cloud9. Lots to break down about how Flyquest got there, and we will get there in a little bit. But let's start with the LEC finals. Just concluded. G2, we said it at the top of the split weeks and weeks ago. They've held first position the entire way, Emily, but they hit some bumps along the road. But yet, overcoming all that adversity, they find themselves once again at the top of the mountain. Are you surprised with how the series against Fnatic in the championship went down at all?
Yes, I'm surprised at how this series went down. I'm not surprised that G2 won. If you remember from our last show, I was still predicting G2 to win. I think Jacob was the only one that picked Fnatic. I'm sorry, Jacob. I don't mean to throw you under the bus here.
Okay, Tyler normally gets the wrong predictions. I will totally take it under the bus this time.
But I did not expect it to be a 3-0. I actually expected this to be a lot more back and forth. The thing that stuck out to me is probably something that you've seen on Twitter a lot over the past few hours. And it's that Fnatic, their drafting priority and strategies were let's just say a little bit off, not only in terms of in comparison to what G2 was able to draft, but also in terms of what we've seen from Fnatic coming into the series. I also expected it to be closer because we saw, again, Fnatic doing some really cool stuff with how they're splitting the map and applying pressure in both side lanes. I also think we'd be remiss to say that the series was not lost because of Bwipo, but he had a really poor performance in comparison to especially what we've seen from him in the split on both sides of the same matchup even. So in the Zach Orn matchup. So I think it was a combination of factors. Shout out to G2 and their drafting and the fact that they've been able to really, I think, play in a way that still masks a lot of Caps' inexperience in the AD carry position. I think he's improved a lot, and we should shout that out. But I also think that G2 have kind of adopted a style where they can cover up some of his maybe laning weaknesses and decision making that he still has just because he lacks experience.
Hey, Jacob, this is a tweet from Bwipo moments after the loss. He said, played like expletive, feels awful to have disappointed everyone and wasted their time. I was given the opportunity to capitalize on their game plan and couldn't deliver, not in draft or gameplay. Props to G2 and Wonder, his lane opponent, obviously. They are better. Would you attribute this series victory by G2, Jacob, to G2 simply playing the better game or Fnatic not rising to the occasion, or both?
I think it's both. I think that since they got their loss in round 1 to Mad Lions, I think we've seen a different G2 playing in the lower side of the bracket, a much more, again, and we talked about this on Friday, I don't want to say more motivated, but certainly when you lose like that, you see a vulnerability in yourself and you want to correct it, right? And I think that G2 really honed in on that, wanting to get better and wanting to improve and take this as seriously as possible in a way that they probably weren't. Jankos said that they didn't anticipate, in an interview I read, said that they didn't anticipate that they could even lose to Mad Lions. So that should tell you all that you need to know. And then in the lower side of the bracket, they sort of turned on the gas. I think that Origin was a good warm-up series for them in a way for Fnatic. It kind of got them ready to play against a team that is closer to skill in them than a lot of the people that they could have played throughout the season. I think that, as we've talked about, and I still agree with the sentiment at the end of the season, that Origin and Fnatic were really cut of a different cloth than all the opponents G2 had throughout the rest of the season. So when you look at that, I think that, coming into this, G2 was very prepared. They were hot. They felt like they probably had a little bit of momentum after the losers bracket run that they've had. And yeah, I think that Fnatic fell through today. It seemed like they cracked a little bit in a way that I didn't expect them to when we were discussing this on Friday. I think that this Fnatic team has potential to be one of the best teams Europe has seen, but I think that it comes with time, and I don't know if they're quite there yet. I wouldn't put blame specifically on Blippo. I know he's down on himself right now, and I've been around him enough to know that that's the type of character he is over the past few years, right? Like, he's still a really young guy, and he came up in a system where they had SOAS, and he was kind of the second fiddle who quickly became the first fiddle by his sort of overperformance, right, in terms of expectation when he first started on this Fnatic team. So I wouldn't put it on his hands. I do think Wunder is the better top laner overall. I think Wunder is probably the best top laner in Europe right now, more generally. But I think that, this game was really G2 turning on the gas. And guess what? Caps actually played pretty well, the AD carry. Although I would attribute a lot of the series to Perks and Jankos, really, because I thought Perks was one hell of a performer today. But yeah, I definitely think that Caps was more than serviceable in the way that he needs to be on this team.
So Caps was 11-3-6 on Aphelios in game number 3. He had the 4th double-digit kill game of this playoffs. No other player had done more than one such game, so very impressive there. Also, going back to the Wunder versus Bwipo matchup, Wunder had 2 solo kills in game number 3, had the first blood on Bwipo in game number 1, and held Bwipo, get this, to a 2-16-7 KDA across the series. So Wunder was the decisive winner there. G2 now ties Fnatic with its 7th European title, 7 titles and 9 splits, and G2 improves to 5-1 in a playoff series against Fnatic, and this is the first sweep over Fnatic in a best of 5. Now, based on everything you've seen, Emily, from G2 this split, all of the adversity that they were able to face. They lost to Mad Lions. They went on a great losers bracket run. I know that this is hypothesizing. We don't know what's happening with Worlds. I'm just asking this as a hypothetical because our chat loves hypotheticals. This G2 team that just won the championship, imagine this team at Worlds. Based on the games that you've watched in the LCK and LPL, you watch that more than any of us. How would they fare against those teams, in your opinion?
I'm actually kind of down on the LCK right now. I need to see a little bit more from their top teams. I think the LPL pound for pound has the best top teams in the world right now. They also, by the way, have some of the worst professional teams in the world because there's 17 teams, a lot to get through there. Yeah, there's a lot to get through. They also have Victory 5, so take that as you will, because I'm not saying Victory 5 would beat mid-tier LEC team. That's not the point of this. This G2 though, I think I'm still hesitant to say that they would be able to do as well as last year's G2, who I thought was the best team in the world. I actually picked them to beat FPX because I think FPX they have very specific holes in their play style. They're just so good at their individual play style that it's kind of hard to exploit those sometimes. But this G2, I think, and I don't want to, I'm not dunking on Caps individually, especially not after he had an improved performance. But again, I think G2 are doing a lot of really specific things with their lane assignments, with their draft selection, with just how they're playing around the map that are naturally covering up some of Caps' inexperience in this position. And I don't think he obviously didn't take to it as well or as quickly as Perks did. So I know this is on our list to discuss, but I still don't see this specific G2 team doing as well as last year's G2 team and having the same amount of flexibility and options as last year's G2 team did if they don't role swap back.
Right.
That's my opinion. Yeah. And if you remember, I was actually really high on the role swap initially because I love the way that Perks looks at side lanes. I think he's just so smart about it. And Caps is really good at matchups. And I maintain that those two things are still true, but I still think that they would have to role swap back to be as strong as last year's team.
Do you think that'll happen in the summer?
I just want to say on that point, I really want to emphasize, I think that Perks is one of the best AD carries, or one of the best mid laners, sorry. Perks is one of the best mid laners to ever play in all of Europe.
I think he's one of the best players in the world, just period.
I agree, but I also think that Caps is pretty close, I would say, in terms of mid lane and what we saw in performance in Fnatic and G2 last year. And so I think when you look, Perks Perks can be either. He is not the problem. Caps looks way more uncomfortable as an AD carry than Perks did last year. So flexing Perks makes way more sense, just based off of what we've seen from our sample size of the past 3 months versus last year. But I feel like Perks is definitely like Perks. It's not a Perks problem. It's a Caps problem.
Do you think that they will make the switch in the summer split?
I mean, I have no idea. I think it probably depends on what they want to do internally and what the players want to do. This is a team that seems like still very symbiotic is the word that's coming to mind, which is probably the wrong one, but like they seem to get along really well on and off, right? And I think that's actually been a huge key component of how well this team's done. So I think it will depend on what the players themselves wanted and what the impetus for the initial swap was. I do, because I don't know if we'll have time to talk about it later, I want to give a shout out to Mickey, like unsung hero of this team, bringing up 2 players that previously had not played AD carry before. And I think a lot of his contributions to this team go unnoticed. He won the MVP today, and I think that was like incredibly well deserved. But just in terms of how this team has been able to be so flexible and have people rotating in and out of the bot lane position, I think Mickey deserves all the credit in the world for that.
Speaking of MVPs, Jankos was voted as the Spring Split MVP in the LEC, and rightfully so. 59% of possible ballots had Jankos as the first choice for MVP, and 89.7% of voters voted for Jankos for MVP in some placement. First in KDA with 6.3, and damage per minute, 388, also first. So Jankos had a heck of a split, and it's very fitting. I mean, we've been talking about a lot of the challenges for G2, particularly Perks and Caps, but Jankos coming in here as the MVP, and it seems very appropriate, Jacob.
Yeah, I think Jankos and Mickey are both really good examples of what you can become when you're in a good team, right? Like we have seen both of them in their careers.
That almost sounds like an insult. I'm sorry.
No, it's not an insult to them at all. It's an insult to their prior teams, to be honest. If you think about where they came from, right? Like the Rock Hat teams of old that Jankos was on, and H2K, right? Like these teams were not bad. In fact, H2K at one point went to Worlds. However, they were certainly not G2 good, right? And Splice wasn't that great either back then when Mickey first started out in the LCS. So, you know, really the circumstance, right? Like I would argue now, I think you could make a good case argument that Jankos is the best jungler to ever play in the European Professional League of Legends scene. I almost said LEC, but that's only 2 years. So let's talk about the full 9 here, right? He is certainly up there among them, and I think that like the jungle meta in particular and the jungle position has gotten incredibly more complex in his era versus the era of the previous legends in the jungle position in Europe. Which is all more impressive because it requires a lot of management, requires a lot of understanding of pathing and everything else that you have to do to really make the most of your pressure and to put pressure onto other lanes. That didn't quite exist, as we've seen on Throwback Thursday, as we've watched old streams, or at least didn't exist in the West in the same type of way in Season 1, Season 2, and Season 3. So yeah. we've certainly seen him sort of evolve, and him and Mickey have sort of come into their own over the past 2 years on the G2 team. And I think it's because they're surrounded by similar skill players across the board in Caps, Perks, and Wonder.
Emily, last thing on Jankos before we move on?
I think I'm not surprised that Jankos received it. I think this is a split where I personally would have given it to Perks if I was going to give it to a G2 player, just because I think he did a lot for this team, especially as they were kind of trying to figure out how they wanted to play with Caps in the bot lane, how he was acclimating to that bot lane position. Some of the things that they were doing topside were also pretty interesting. I just think that I think that Perks would have gotten it for me, but I don't have a problem with Jankos getting it, if that makes sense. Like it's not there's an argument for both.
So we're going to move on to the LCS in a little bit. Jacob mentioned Throwback Thursday. We will have a Throwback Thursday this Thursday, and as I understand it, we might very well be watching the 2016 series between Rocks Tigers and SKT at Madison Square Garden. That was actually the first event that I ever covered for League of Legends, so I have a lot of background on that. I'm looking forward to it. There will not be a Rift Rewind after this one next week. The reason is we have a very special Valorant tournament happening. It is the ESPN Esports Valorant Invitational. There will be 8 teams with pros and influencers from many different titles battling it out to see which realm is the best at this game. Team Apex, there are pros and influencers from titles like Apex Legends, Fortnite, PUBG, CSGO, Rainbow Six, Overwatch, Valorant developers, and also League of Legends. If you haven't seen it, ESPN_esports, our Twitter account, has a listing of many of these teams, including the League of Legends team. Get a load of this. Who will be part of the League of Legends squad in this tournament, representing or pros and influencers from League of Legends? Get this. Shifter, I'm a cutie pie, Dyrus, last 2 impress you, Xmithy, and Double Lift. The reunion is on, Jacob.
I know,
In
they're
FPS.
back. They're back together. Yeah, I was about to say they're back together again. The multi-time champions across CLG and TL are back, but it's not because Double Lift got traded. It's because they both want to play Valorant. So welcome to the tournament.
Welcome to the tournament. So that's happening April 20th to 23rd, 3 p.m. Eastern every day. There's going to be a pre-show as well, and then we're going to get into the matches, twitch.tv/ESPN Esports, right here if you're watching us on Twitch right now. Let's go to the LCS. Let's talk about how we got to the championship. Cloud9 was always destined to get there. We know that. We've talked about it. But Flyquest, a team that was consistently battling and in second place in the regular season, let's be honest, the 3 of us, we did not say Flyquest at all. We didn't say Flyquest would make the finals. Maybe they would have been competitive, but none of us predicted this Spring Split final that we are seeing. So when you look at the semifinal matchup, Jacob, Flyquest and Evil Geniuses, how did Flyquest exactly defeat EG on their way to the championship?
Well, I point no further than Ignar and PoE. I certainly think that Flyquest has ascended throughout the season. You heard a lot of talk yesterday on the broadcast about solo and sort of like shoring up their top lane versus Viper, which is interesting because like Viper was once regarded as like this rising star, obviously very popular streamer because he was incredibly skilled and people enjoyed watching him. But solo plays a different game style that I think is more complementary to the rest of the team, this Flyquest team, and damn, did they do a good job betting on Power of Evil this year. A lot of people criticized that move, particularly because Power of Evil had a little bit of a down season on CLG last year, and people thought maybe he was a little washed, but he is not. And reuniting with Ignar, his former Misfits teammate, both of them played incredibly well yesterday. And Ignar is making the most out of this team in a way that I think is somewhat destined to be, right? I'm happy for Ignar because he's a player that, if you go back far enough in the history of him, you know, he was a player that was supposed to be on a Winter Fox team and then ended up not doing it because he hated the boot camp so much to the point where like he broke his contract at the end of the boot camp.
It's a fun story.
It was really nasty, actually, how everything happened. And then he played on various different teams in South Korea, and he was all right. People like regarded him as this like solo queue myth in a sort of way in South Korea when any Western team would go boot camp. And then you saw him unlocked for really the first time in Misfits. Dude was a killer in the EU LCS on Misfits. And then we saw him go back to South Korea. And now we have seen him come to North America and do his thing. I've been incredibly impressed by Ignar this split. I think that he deserves mad props as to sort of pushing Flyquest further and further throughout the split. And combined with Santorin, who I think a lot of people underestimate continually. And when you talk about junglers in the West, Santorin is really smart, I think, is what is the best way I would describe him. He may not be the most mechanically impressive person, right? Like, he's not in the same way that we would talk about Sinskaren or Jankos, who I think both are very good at mechanically when you look at sort of the way they play the game, and especially on very difficult champions. But Santorin's really, really intelligent in the way that he manages the game. I think that pairing that with someone who, like Ignar, is really good and has unlocked Flyquest's potential.
Emily, M. Breyer in the chat says, Santorin jungled smarter and Ignar roamed much better. You agree?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think we talked about this in our previous show, right? But when I'm looking at how this team wins, it's through their jungle support duo. I think a lot should be said about their jungle mid duo as well, which Jacob kind of alluded to. But also we'll discuss later, I'm sure, when we're talking about them going up against C9 specifically. But I think Santorin, he, like, even in this series, we saw him respond to a lot of things that we knew were kind of tells for evil geniuses. And he I think I'm specifically thinking of game 4. His early path was really, really good and just like really, really smart. I think this Trundle pick is also something that's worked out really well for them. It's kind of funny because they hadn't prepped it at all before he played it in playoffs. He told me in an interview that I did with him earlier on in the their playoff run. So I think that's kind of funny in terms of how he has been able to do so well on that champion specifically with a lot of the compositions that they've been running. But yeah, I mean, I think this series also a little bit came down to EG. I think the reason why I had picked them to win, even though I said it was going to be like a really close 3-2, is that I thought that they had a little bit more of a defined style and were more consistent in executing it. But sometimes you see them pick compositions and mis-execute them. Not pick compositions, but they select compositions that look good and then they mis-execute them, or they don't play to what the team has wanted to do with a 1-3-1 or a 4-1. And I also think that that we saw Flyquest really prepare well for this, where they were putting PoE on, like, you know, the Victor, the Orianna, stuff that he can just they really take advantage of how he's able to control that mid. And, you know, talking about mid jungle, like, that opens up options for Santorin. It additionally opens up options for Ignar if they're pushing bot wave and then he's roaming. So it does a lot, and I feel like we're seeing a Flyquest team that, where they were previously really inconsistent about how they wanted to play, where, you know, you ramp up to the point where you can have Ignar roaming, you can have Santorin controlling a lot of the jungle and also being in lanes. You now see that coming to fruition and them being a lot more consistent about executing it. And that's what this series really came down to.
So, Jacob, you're very good at reporting and predicting roster moves. Let's do a quick postmortem on Evil Geniuses after this split. They did well. They didn't get where they wanted to go, but they turned it on in March and even made it to the playoffs, which was impressive to begin with. Do you think this roster looks much different for Summer Split?
Much different, no. But I've been very unimpressed by Kumo, to be honest. Like, he's good enough to be in the LCS, and I won't argue that. But he's not in a class of Licorice and Someday. He's more comparable to Solo in a lot of different ways. He does the job, and we'll call it, but he's not against the best, right? Or he's not comparable to the best in the league. I don't know if it's him. I don't know if it's something else. There's a reason a lot of these players are no longer on Cloud9, because a lot of them either weren't motivated to be there, or motivated to really grind out the game in the same way that the players that are currently on Cloud9 do so, and working efficiently, not more hours. I want to be clear. But I do think that to really take this roster to the next level, there's got to be maybe 1 or 2 changes. I would point specifically to top and support. But also Bang had a hot start. Shizuke, we talk about a lot, having a really good end of season. But Bang, I thought, started better than he did on 100 Thieves. But it kind of petered out over the split. So I think that I don't know if they'll make a change, because they've invested a lot of money into this roster, and how much more do you want to invest in the middle of a pandemic where no one can raise money?
Right.
But nonetheless, I do think that it will have to come soon enough if they want to unlock the next potential and try to compete with Flyquest and Cloud9.
I know that we're veering off topic here. We will be previewing C9 versus Flyquest, but since we're talking about roster changes, we have had some news from teams not in the playoffs, right? We've heard that Huni's allowed to take a look at other options wherever he might go next. We know that the Doublelift situation is ongoing, likely not returning to Team Liquid. Where will he go next? What do you Let me ask it more generally like this. Which team do you think we will see look the most drastically different going into Summer Split?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I
have
haven't really
no
thought.
clue.
I haven't really thought about that. My initial thought would be Dig.
Do you think that some of those academy players will be called up? Do you think that we'll see some of those players that are veterans?
I think some of those academy players will be let go. Like I said on Friday's show,
Yeah.
I think that Dig is in a peculiar money position relative to their entire, like Emily said 2 shows ago, like relative to their entire parent company having really interesting financial boons right now because of the pandemic. You know, Core 3 in chat says that, or Core says in chat that he thinks it's CLG, and that may be right also.
Do you think Pobelter stays? Does Pobelter stay on CLG?
I wouldn't see why not. I think that the people you for certain keep are Pobelter and Stixay. Stixay's just been there for a long time. I know Wind got to play, and maybe you promote Wind and put Stixay down, but like, I don't know. CLG, like, there's nothing to me that says that you want to like really keep trying to make that roster any better. I feel like there's not a huge ceiling for it anyway. But we live in interesting times, right? Like we've talked about this at length. We talked about this, Tyler, Emily, and I did on the Double Lift thing the other day. We're in the middle of a pandemic. People can't raise money for like 18 months probably. The economy's in the toilet. People are going to struggle to fundraise. They're going to be using capital that they anticipated to use for the next 6 to 8 months to survive as a business. They're going to have to make that work for 18, or they're going to have to sell. And this is a wide prediction here, but like, I think we may see some LCS orgs sell their slots or sell their teams.
Ooh.
Wow.
And together, the entire organization.
Spicy.
Let me just warm my hands on your hot take here.
By the end of 2020, and that is somewhat informed, so go ahead and do with what you will with it. But I do think that there will be some orgs that can't weather this because of the way they're set up. And that's a bigger talk about sort of how esports teams are set up and the way they raise money and take in funds, right? There's a lot of issue with how people handle valuations. There are very few teams I would even point to being sort of stable as businesses, and really the 3 of them are the ones you think very historically, which are TSM, C9, and CLG. Or not CLG, Team Liquid, sorry. Those 3 are really like, you know, if you look at their parent companies and their portfolios, they have lots of things that make them money and that they can weather this, right? Like TSM has the Blitz app, which is a part of Swift, and they have all the websites, ProBuilds, and so amid.net. And then you look at Cloud9, and Cloud9 is also involved in like Flashpoint operationally, right? Like they are sort of one of the godfathers of that league. They're building all these various different things. And you look at Liquid, Axiomatic, their parent group owns stock in Epic Games, which hasn't gone down because people are still playing Fortnite, playing games even more now amid the pandemic. Epic Games, Niantic, which developed Pokemon Go, which unfortunately, well, that one's not so great right now to own. But nonetheless, you look at it, some of these teams are really stable in the way that they built themselves. However, some of them are not. And they're just esports teams that don't have a lot of fans. They don't sell a lot of merchandising, right? Like their revenues are already pretty low. They're probably in the red because they're not making enough money to recoup some of these $1 million+ salaries. Hello, Dignitas. But yeah, you look at this, and I think there are certain teams in this league that will not be here next year.
That is a great take, Jacob. Actually, you took that in a great direction there. I didn't even think about teams wanting to sell their slots because they were so lucrative. Like, I wouldn't have even ever thought of that situation even 6 months ago.
But
when we were in studio, right?
But think about it for just a second, right? Think about it for just a second. How many teams and I've had a lot of conversations around this lately. How many teams in the LCS actually have fans? Versus their player having fans.
Well, TSM
right?
has fans.
Even
has fans.
This is something
Liquid has fans.
No. So even the teams in the finals, right? Cloud9 has fans. 100% they do, right? And they've done a good job at marketing that. How many fans of Flyquest exist? I like the org a lot.
I will say I think that Flyquest this year has done a better job of getting fans.
I agree.
Else because they focused on team branding over like individual player branding. But I think this is a problem that like a ton of Western teams have had in terms of merchandising and marketing, like across the board, where I compare it to teams in the LPL, and you like sure like it's still very player driven in terms of like you'll have fans follow from player to player, but you also have like fans of orgs, and the organizations themselves do a really good job of merchandising and marketing themselves like as a brand, instead of just being like we have this player and they're now going to become the face of our team, but they also might leave next year and we don't know where that leaves our team.
CLG
forward.
is a great example of this. What is CLG in a post-Afro Move double lift world? Right, in terms of branding and staying power and people being CLG fans long term. Not just, and I'm not saying just watching them, because watching doesn't necessarily help the revenues as much. Buying their merchandising. If they were to hold an event, would you go to it and pay to get in the door, right? And it's
to be fair, I
remember like bring in team revenues.
I will say this: I have hosted in the past, full disclosure, CLG events, even as late as maybe a year ago, and they were able to bring in fans to MSG to do events. It wasn't at proper MSG; it was in the Hulu Theater, right? But they did bring in fans, and they had CLG representatives there and their League of Legends team. So those activations actually do pretty well. But I get what you're saying in terms of like awareness and how many fans they have for each team. It's a very, very valid point. But we do got to move on here on the Rift Rewind. And for those joining us fresh right now, I can see the numbers here. Thank you for joining us on the Rift Rewind, which is an ESPN League of Legends program. We're going to preview the LCS final between Cloud9 and Flyquest in just a second. Just a quick reminder. We actually have organized an ESPN Esports Valorant Invitational. 8 teams from different titles, including Apex Legends, Fortnite, PUBG, CSGO, Rainbow Six, Overwatch, Valorant developers, and yes, League of Legends, Doublelift, Smithy, reuniting to play Valorant. It's going to happen from April 20th to April 22nd, 3 p.m. Eastern, every single day, twitch.tv/ESPN Esports. It's a tournament to crown what we would believe to be a champion in Valorant in a different title. We had a chance, I should say, Emily Rand had a chance to speak with Blaber, who is the LCS MVP, for a few minutes going into the matchup against Flyquest. A wide variety of topics were discussed. Let's get to that right now.
Hi all, it's Emily Rand with ESPN Esports, and hi, I'm happy to be joined by LCS MVP Blaber. So first of all, just congratulations. It came down to you and your teammate Niski. So how much did you expect to take the title yourself?
I'm pretty sure that coming into it, I was pretty sure it was going to be me and Niski in the final 2, but honestly, I didn't think I would win it. I really thought Niski was going to win this split. I mean, I think I played pretty good this split, but I think after his last Chocolate 1 MVP, that maybe he would have won it this time, but I mean, I'll take it.
I think one of the things that is really, it's a good argument, right? Because even if you're like, you think Niski should have won, I feel like the two of you are so symbiotic, you can't separate. Like you've been by far the best mid jungle in NA LCS. And Niski has actually talked about his admiration for Joinby and how much he learned at Worlds. What did you yourself learn at Worlds in the games you played, and how did the two of you develop such a strong mid jungle style?
I think me and Niski have always been pretty good together. I mean, we didn't really play together that much last year, obviously, because I wasn't actually the starter. Even though we scrimmed a bit, I did have some rough games on stage where I couldn't really win. Even though I got early game leads, and I think at Worlds, I think the most as a jungler that I learned was from playing against FPX 2 and against Canyon, I guess, because I thought Canyon was the best jungler that I faced during Worlds and scrims, and I think FPX was the hardest to jungle against, because I mean, we would scrim FPX and LWX is flashing on me by himself 1v3 on my blue buff just so I don't get the blue buff level 1. Yep. So then he'll die, and then his jungler will take my red while I'm dying, he's dying at blue buff, and they pretty much always move to help their jungler, and it's Doinby and Tian, they were super good 2v2, and that was something that me and Niski really looked at, and how we could push early game advantages, or recently we've been invading a lot level 1 or having a lot of early game plans. That's something we took from FPX, because it just felt as a jungler, me and Dennis, we talked about it, it was yeah, jungling versus FPX is just not a thing.
It's not fun for anyone in LPL. I remember a game at Worlds where you like absolutely popped off on Elise in the early game and then ended up over committing on like a bot tier 1 dive, and it seemed like you were still trying to find a balance between like your super early aggression and then not having those risks sometimes be punished by opponents. This year I feel like you found that balance. So how did you, and how would you describe your individual progression as a jungler?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think I progressed a lot this year, especially with, I guess, not going for the most insane plays. I think Reaper told me a lot with that. He's always been telling me, like, you need to think about survival first. Like, that's the first thing in League of Legends. If you make a play, then you need to think about, like, how am I going to survive? Like, after I make this, like, I'm going to outplay and then I can live. Like, sure, that's a fine plan, you know, but you need some sort of survival plan. It can't just be, like, 1-for-1 at best, 0-for-1 at worst, you know? So he has helped me with a lot with that, and I think my teammates have been really good at supporting me and like what I want to do in the early game. They pretty much is like, if I say something, it's like they'll try their best to help me with it, and if they really can't, they'll call me off.
And then you've previously talked about in other interviews the pressure that came with the possibility of like always being subbed out previously. What has it been like to play completely free of that pressure this year?
It definitely feels a lot better for sure to not have pressure on you that if you perform bad, then you'll get subbed out. Because I mean, for me, it's also like scrims are stressful too. Like just in general, the environment is way more stressful because it's like if you don't perform well in scrims, you're not playing, you know. And especially for me back then when Svenskeren was starting, it was like I would have to overperform by a decent amount, I'd say, in order for me to get playtime. Otherwise, I was just not playing, you know.
And then Santorin and PoE, your finals opponents, have been arguably one of the other stronger like jungle mid duos. So how are you and Niski going to prepare to take them on?
I actually think that PoE has been playing really well this playoffs, and I think they're pretty strong mid 2v2, but they don't play for anything aggressive early. They play more for scaling, and I think it's worked against like these other teams, but I really think that if they just let me and Niski do whatever we want in the early game, just give us full priority, then their bot and top will have a rough time.
And then lastly, a lot of people just describe C9 as like, oh, they're hyper aggressive, and then they kind of just end the description there. How would you describe C9's playstyle this year?
I mean, I definitely say we're really aggressive, but I think mainly we play through mid 2v2 and we draft that way too, I'd say. I'd say that's where we mainly focus on. We make sure we have like, I guess, pushing bot or winning bot and then a strong mid 2v2 so that if me and Niski are able to, I guess, win, like regardless of if we have winning top or bot, we're able to free them up because we've been moving around the map really well together. So I definitely say like our playstyle is more playing through mid, I guess. And I guess aggressive because we're always evading with our mid prio.
Nice. Well, all the best going up against Flyquest today.
So thank you to Blaber for giving us and Emily some time before the matchup against Flyquest. We talked about that aggressive play style, Emily. It's been very successful for them, of course, 17-1 in the regular season. And then they're cruising in the playoffs, have only lost one game. Let's talk about the finals. Let's talk about Flyquest versus C9. A lot of people might already be predicting a 3-0 here. Like, how does Flyquest make this series at least competitive?
So they, in my opinion, they kind of have to do it through the most difficult option. They basically have to figure out a way to use, in my opinion, and I know I said this for like, if remember we did the hypothetical, like if 100 Thieves can manage to beat C9, like how would that ever happen? I think it kind of has to happen the same way, and it's the most difficult route, right? Because Blaber talked about it. I've talked about it on the show. We've all talked about it, how strong C9's mid jungle is, how the style that they play opens them up to do a lot of things in their side lanes. You're not going to get the same top lane mismatch like individually, I think, that you had between Solo and Kumo in their last thing, because Licorice, again, I talked about how I'd like love to just stream Licorice's pro view in terms of how he plays weak side, how he plays strong side. He's just like incredibly, incredibly good. And So I think you're not going to have that same mismatch at times. So you need to somehow manage to take advantage of mid jungle. And the only way that I can see FlyQuest doing that is I do think Santorin has obviously a leg up in experience on Blaber. So if he can apply that to try to, put in a lot of effort into tracking Blaber on the map, making sure he's not getting into lanes early, or making sure he's not able to farm to a point where he can contribute to team fights later on, depending on, what champions Blaber decides to pick. But then also the other part has to come from Nisqy. And the 1-2 punch of Blaber and Nisqy is so incredibly strong. They work so well together in how they're able to cover the map. And FlyQuest, I think, kind of has to come with an opposite strategy, where instead of like C9 likes to radiate that pressure outward by sending Nisqy to side lanes, right? What you want to do if you're FlyQuest is you want to make sure that Nisqy cannot leave mid. So PoE is so good at holding mid. Like that is like, I think one of his strengths is that he is just an incredibly strong laner. He can force his lane opponent so that they can't just shove the wave and move to side lanes or move to jungle and roam for skirmishes and picks. So that's actually where it has to come from, in my opinion. And like I said, it's not like this is a weakness of C9. It is a strength. So it would involve a lot of preparation. It would involve some pretty specific drafting, in my opinion. But yeah, that's the only way I see FlyQuest really being able to go toe-to-toe with C9, is if they use their advantages that they do have in mid-jungle and try to destabilize C9's mid-jungle.
This is a tweet from Azael, just posted it right now, actually. He said, hype for LCS finals. Either Cloud9 gets their first championship since 2014 and completes one of the most dominant runs ever, or we have a FlyQuest victory and one of the greatest upsets ever in LCS history. Let's go. So I from that point of view, we have a storyline-rich final, which gets me hyped because I love me some good storylines going into this. Jacob, which victory would be more compelling for the future of LCS, the dominant C9 completion or the massive upset FlyQuest?
God, that just blows my mind that it's been since 2014.
Yeah, right? Like, I know I reacted. I was just like, whoa.
Yeah, crazy, right? Crazy, right?
6 years ago. And it just like I remember where I was and what I was doing when they won those championships in 2013 and 2014.
Same.
And it doesn't seem like it was 6 years ago. Like the like infamous like C9 Samsung series at Worlds and Quarters, that doesn't seem like it's 6 years ago. So and it is, but it blows my mind. Yeah, I mean, I think that there's two different things here, right? And FlyQuest is actually, I find this compelling, and I get that the players have changed over, so the storyline's not as much here, but FlyQuest wouldn't be in the LCS if it weren't for Cloud9. Mm-hmm. Remember that this was Cloud9's secondary team that got promoted and then had to be sold and was bought by the ownership family of the Milwaukee Bucks, right? Like, that's why they're here. And sort of interestingly enough, right, like, FlyQuest, as we had mentioned earlier, like, has gotten better progressively as a brand, has gotten better at recruiting players. They've hired more and more staff. They've really built out, right? Like, it was not the like two people who were involved when they started, when they took over the C9 team. It's a much more thorough operation, and sort of also mounting to this point, right? Like, they've brought in people from Immortals and Liquid and others to really build up what they are here. So this, to me, like, the story for C9 is like their own roster is built out of talent development. Vulcan, Blaber, Licorice, right? These are all relatively inexperienced isn't the right word, but they are like legacy players of League of Legends. Even versus some of the other people who are on their own team, like Nisqy and Spin, who have been here a little bit longer than they have professionally. And especially versus some of the people on FlyQuest, like Wild Turtle, who has been here and was a former C9 guy also, or was part of the Quantic roster that became C9, right? Like, so it's like that they are the ideal of talent development. Whereas like FlyQuest is the build over time, right? Scale up every single season, get progressively better until you reach this point. So, you know, and obviously there's the upset factor of upsetting one of the best teams North America's ever seen. So I don't know, like I like both. The storylines are great. It's either like North America is finally invested in some talent, although Nisqy and Spin obviously are not North American. but they played a lot of their careers in North America. Sven's been here with TSM and now with C9. Niski was here at Envy at one point, right? Like before he was really sort of what he was on Splice. He went back to Europe and then came back to Cloud9, right? Like this is, I like both outcomes here because I think that they speak to something about North America that's kind of fun from a storyline perspective, even if it's not the most competitive region in the world.
This reminds me of the Patriots season in 2007 where they went perfect in the regular season and they made it all the way. Sorry, Emily, I know you're a New England person. Not to bring up old wounds here. You're not a Patriots fan, so we're fine with this. That season, the Patriots went undefeated all season. They made it all the way to the Super Bowl, but they lost to the Giants by 3 points. And I wonder, when you look back at that, the Patriots were still a dynasty, right? C9 has the potential, if they continue like this, especially if they are a cut above the rest, they have the potential to build a dynasty, but it must start with a championship. So I wonder if Flyquest were to win here, and by the way, our chat completely is unanimous that C9 will win this series, and right now there's a poll up on how they will win this series. Right now, 3-0 and 3-1 are leading the way. But when you look at the Patriots, they still have a pedigree of winning. That dynasty is still in place. But then there's that blemish, right? The 2 championships lost to the Giants, especially this perfect season. So I wonder how we will look back on C9, especially since the turnover is so fast in esports. This is the time for C9. How many more splits will they have of this kind of dominance? Look at Team Liquid. 4 straight victories, and now they fell off the map. But it has to start with a championship. So it's almost, in a way, more important for C9 to get this first championship, to establish that, because no one's going to be talking about this incredible season if they don't win the chip. Right, Emily?
Yes. I mean, I think that C9 absolutely has to win here. I think that if you have, it's really hard to have esports dynasties. I would say the only one that we've ever had in League of Legends is SK Telecom. However, I think that because the Patriots comparison is even particularly apt for me because I believe they'd already won a Super Bowl or 2 prior to that perfect season. So you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm 90% sure on that.
Yeah.
Correct. This is a C9 team that, as we said, has, again, completely different roster, hasn't won a championship since 2014. And that is something that I know C9 is aware of, in terms of the staff and the upper management. But these players, again, I keep going back to that quote from Licorice that is, it was in an article I wrote for a semifinals preview, but I posted it again to Twitter last week. It's he was just I don't care that I'm home. I don't care if there's no audience. We need to win. We want to win. This is super, super important. And you get the sense that everyone on this C9 roster is so dedicated to winning, whether it's because, they were on another team and they either feel underappreciated or feel like they have something to prove. I feel like Vulcan definitely feels like he has something to prove after he did, so well at Worlds, and C9 was we are investing monetarily in you heavily, and you are our guy that we want for this team. Sven recovering from, his down years with TSM, when he was brought over after being, the best in the West bot lane, and then coming over to TSM and not performing up to, I guess, the kind of very high expectations that were expected of him. And then you have Niski, Blaber, and Licorice, who have all been with this team for a few years. Licorice and Blaber, who came up through the organization itself. And they have not won a title, despite the fact that they've been trying to contend for one. So it's this team is despite the fact that they've had this phenomenal split and whatever, they're incredibly focused on winning this championship. That is kind of everything to them, because to, I guess, come full circle on the Patriots point you made, Arda, they don't have another championship to look back on and say, hey, we won this last year, right? This is it. They need to prove themselves. And they also need to prove themselves, I think, in terms of everyone's been asking, and I know this is, you get into specious comparisons, but whenever an NA team specifically does really, really well in the region, the question everyone asks is, yeah, but NA sucks. could they perform internationally? And unfortunately, the options, as we've covered this in previous shows, and what I think is the most unfortunate thing for this C9 roster is if they win, they can't go boot camp, right? Like they can't go to an MSI location and prove themselves against other teams unless we have the high proposed on Twitter just recently, a 200 plus ping tournament where everyone just logs in online, which I would love, but I'm sure the players.
I bet a lot of people would love that by now at this point.
But yeah, like this C9 team, like they absolutely have to win this to prove that their split and their season is valid. I think that more than anything, like we've talked about, is there an asterisk on this season? I don't think there's an asterisk on this season unless they lose here in the final.
Okay, we have about
FlyQuest. I just want to say, I just think FlyQuest has so much. Like that's a lot to gain for C9. FlyQuest has even more to gain, though. I think if you look at, if I'm not mistaken, and this is right off the top of my head, there's only 4 banners, 4 different logos on banners hung in the LCS arena.
CLG,
Yep, CLG, TL, TSM, and C9. Yeah. And we were just talking about earlier how esports teams, a lot of esports teams don't have real fans. You know how you get real fans? You know why C9 has so many fans? So they dominated in 2013 and 2014, and they were simultaneously quite entertaining on stream. Sneaky, Medios, etc. Right? People made that brand connection by also them being good and people caring about them. You want to know how you get to be a part of that nice little party? FlyQuest, you win the damn championship. That's how you do it right now. You win this weekend. And I think that is the next step for them, is to cement, because everyone, if you work behind the scenes, you know FlyQuest is pretty good, well-regarded work, right? Like a lot of people that work there are like very respectable human beings. They've done a lot in their careers and they like have a really good understanding of the organization. But to fans don't give a crap about that. Fans care about winning, and that's what matters at the end of the day. And so there's a lot to gain here to join that list if you are FlyQuest, to join the list of the 4 that have those banners.
We have 9 minutes to go before the final begins. We will end completely on time, so you can head on over to ESPN2 or the ESPN app to watch the LCS final between FlyQuest and C9. You are absolutely right, both of you. Everybody loves a winner, and I guarantee you can take this to the bank. If FlyQuest wins somehow, some way, imagine a world where FlyQuest wins this final, they will gain fans in droves. They win a championship, they will bring in a whole bunch of new fans. I imagine people will be buying jerseys and they will be changing profile pictures. The Tree Quest initiative will have been complete. The Go Green initiative, people will be embracing them, but they have to win. Making the finals is not quite enough. They have to win. So why don't we break down the lane matchups or the 1v1 matchups as we look down from top to bottom. My first question is this. Viper versus Solo on FlyQuest, right, Emily? Solo played all 4 games in the semifinal, has been playing a lot this postseason. Mm-hmm. Who do you think is the better matchup against Licorice in particular?
I mean, probably Solo. I still think that Licorice is the better top laner. I don't think it's going to be like, I could be mistaken because I think FlyQuest have been focusing a little bit more on top side since Solo returned, but I don't think maybe we will see more action topside. Actually, now that I'm thinking this through, interrupting myself and changing my opinion. I still don't think we're going to see as much focus as we saw like with 100 Thieves, right? And like shutting down Someday. But I do think that this is more evenly matched for Solo than the Solo Kumo matchup, but it's really hard for me to say that anyone's going to beat Licorice because again, even if he's playing weak side, he loses so gracefully that it's never a pain point for C9. And that's the most important thing when I'm talking about like a 1v1 matchup.
So I wonder, what about other lane matchups? Jacob, you can pick any of them. Is there anywhere that you think that there's a distinct advantage for either team? I mean, mid lane. I think people would point to mid lane. Like Power of Evil's been pretty good.
Jacob, you're just like,
People can't see it because we're on B-roll right now. But
no. I don't think mid lane there's a discrepancy. I actually think these guys are probably the two best mid laners in North America right now. Like in the NAL or in the LCS, they're great. Like Power of Evil's had a resurgent season. Niski is becoming everything he always wanted to be, and like it's shown that he could be. No, Bjergsen's had a down, like he's still good, but he's had a down season compared to his previous peaks, right? I think that Niski and PoE are the best mid laners in the LCS. I'll stick with that opinion. Breyer said this earlier in chat, and I do want to point to it. The one win condition here for FlyQuest is having Ignar help Santorin, right? Blaber is majorly aggressive. I would not be surprised if he does some counter jungling and gets up in Santorin's face. However, if you make that a 2v1 and you send Ignar roaming around the map with Santorin, if the bot lane advantage is pushed, which again, they're facing Sven and Vulcan, who in their own right are one of the best bot lanes in the LCS. So you have a little bit stiffer competition pushing that. But if you can actually, not from an advantage perspective, but actually push the lane where Wild Turtle can, play up and leave, or, freeze it in a way that makes it where he's safe and he's not susceptible to Blaber, and you go find Blaber if you're Santorin and Ignar and really put him down, that is what you have to do, right? Blaber is very aggressive. Niski likes to roam with him. They like to try to gang up on the enemy jungler. If Ignar can really get to the point where he roams with them and either protects or helps aggress with Santorin, that is a way FlyQuest can win games. If they do it enough and they do it reliably. It is not an easy thing to do, though. It's very hard against the C9 team, who is very in sync with one another, but I do agree with that.
I was going to say, I think that's where, if you're looking at like pound for pound 2v2 matchups, that's probably where FlyQuest is at the most disadvantage. And the reason for that isn't like, that's not a wow, Wild Turtle and Ignar suck. It's more about how they play, right? So like Jacob mentioned, like you basically have to get Turtle into a position where he's not going to be susceptible to ganks. Turtle has been known to play very far up in lane, even when his support is known with him. So that is, I think, a place where C9 can definitely take advantage, especially if they have Niski roaming bot side, because you have two roaming paths that you're going to look at. They're really important to these teams, right? It's what is Niski's roam timing from mid? So like when is he shoving the wave and trying to affect side lanes? And then on the opposite side, when is either like Turtle and Ignar shoving the wave and then sending Ignar to roam, or when is Turtle playing back so that Ignar can roam? And those timings and that bot river and bot river vision is going to be so insanely important for this series.
I know that it is almost apples and oranges to compare matchups in the regular season to the playoffs, but it does bear mentioning that in the two matches between Cloud9 and Flyquest this season, as you're taking a look at the different matchups on your screen right now, but in the regular season matchups between Cloud9 and Flyquest, it was definitely a 2-0 for Cloud9. And we should note that Solo did not play in either of those matchups. He was in Academy at the time. But the kills were 31-8. Towers were 18-2. Dragons were 7-2. And Barons were 2-0. So it was definitely dominant. This was definitely during Cloud9's rage phase, where they were just demolishing everybody in the first half of the season.
Has that phase ended?
I mean, no, but we have seen... At least in some points, we've seen teams
cracks.
able to get a little bit, but like maybe not enough to say, oh my gosh, the water is going to break through the dam. I'm not saying that at all. What I am saying is those matches happened in a different era. Let's just say that of this split.
That's fair.
But
hello, Curry. I just want to say to Curry, if you do not ban Zoe, you will get very high spam messages from me on Discord because you know better.
You have it here first. Jacob is threatening a member of FlyQuest coaching staff.
Yes, that's right.
Live on stream.
Do not ban. Do it now.
Ban it now.
By the way,
if Niski gets Zoe a single time in this series, I question it, right? Like I get there are other things you would like to ban.
I thought you were gonna have something stronger to say than I question it.
But yeah, like Zoe, like you want to talk about roams. Dude can kill his solo laner or chunk out his solo laner and then move halfway across the damn map because she's fast as hell. So yeah, like
so he's such a fun champion.
Out the window, or Santorin's gonna die a lot, and it's gonna be very unfortunate. So go away, Zoe, out of the draft phase every single time.
Okay, predict the series final. We have a couple minutes left, so take 30 seconds and just give us your final thoughts on this matchup, starting with Jacob.
3-1 Cloud9. I do think Flyquest will take a game. I think that it's possible. We've already seen C9 lose one game in the playoff. I think that Flyquest is the better team between Evil Geniuses and them based off yesterday's events. So I think we will be seeing a 3-1 where Cloud9 comes out on top, but we do see a little bit of vulnerability.
Emily.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really similar to the EG series that we saw with C9, where, the EG was able to take a game, but ultimately C9 just have a really strong understanding of their own team identity, minutia in the game, like certain wave management and wave pushes and stuff like that, like vision, all that stuff. I think C9 are just so much more of a complete team at this point in time, although, props to Flyquest, I didn't think they'd be here at all. So I think their progression and their understanding of how they want to play as a team is just only like increased exponentially as the playoffs have gone on. But yeah, 3-1.
Turn on ESPN2 right now or the ESPN app. The championship is going to take place in about a minute or less between Flyquest and Cloud9. Quick announcement, a ESPN Esports Valorant Invitational. Pros and influencers from many different titles, including League of Legends and Valorant developers, all involved. It is starting on April 20th to April 23rd, 3:30 p.m. Eastern with the pre-show. The three of us will be involved throughout the way. And also Thursday, Throwback Thursday, we'll be watching a past League of Legends event. And it's going to be a lot of fun. So tune into the ESPN Esports Valorant Invitational, April 20th to 22nd, 3:30 p.m. Eastern start each day with the pre-show and then a bunch of matches with 8 teams from pros and influencers from many different titles. But for now, for Emily and Jacob, I'm Arda. Thank you very much for watching Rift Rewind. The show will be back in the future. We won't have a show this upcoming week because of the Valorant Invitational. We got lots to do, but what you need to do right now is watch the final. Will it be Cloud9 for the first time since 2014, raising a trophy high in the air, or will Flyquest complete an improbable championship victory? We will find out just as you will find out. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you next time.